Hello everyone, Ruslan Bailov here, and this is the daily roundup of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. Last night was very intense in Kiev. The Russian army carried out a massive strike on Ukrainian plants and other targets. A large number of ballistic missiles were launched at the city. According to open-source data, around 27 missiles were fired, including several Zircons and Iskanders. Zelensky himself stated that only one missile was intercepted by a Patriot system, largely because Ukraine is critically short of interceptors for that system. According to open sources, it isn't only Ukraine facing a missile shortage. The United States and its European allies are also running critically low on these interceptors. Germany has nearly emptied its stockpiles and has very few of these missiles left. The war in Iran continues, and according to American newspapers, including the Washington Post, Trump is preparing an escalation there, meaning consumption of PAC-2 and PAC-3 interceptors will be enormous. Zelensky recently met with Trump and asked for 300 Patriot missiles, but Trump refused, since the US itself urgently needs them. It's still unclear how long the war in Iran will drag on, since there's no end in sight there either. By the way, some footage of the aftermath of last night's strikes on Kiev has surfaced online, and it appears one Patriot launcher, or possibly a German Iris-T launcher, was destroyed. Zelensky says that according to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia will keep intensifying strikes on the Ukrainian capital. Life in the capital has changed considerably in recent times. Ballistic missile strikes every couple of days will hit civilians hard and cause enormous losses if this continues for a few more months. The escalation that Zelensky initiated will come at a heavy cost to residents of Ukraine's capital and to the entire Ukrainian economy. So friends, I'd planned to sum up July today, but we'll do that tomorrow instead because a lot of news has come in from the front, and it's excellent news. There's been a lot of significant progress. As usual, let's start in the north. From Sumy region comes word that the Russian army continues advancing from the settlement of Malaya Slobodka toward the next settlement, Volnaya Slobodka. The advance covered 1.5 kilometers deep into Ukrainian territory with a width of 3 kilometers. Here, AFU positions continue to crumble, and there's nothing they can do about it. It appears that once Volnaya Slobodka is taken, Russian forces will move to close this pocket by capturing the settlement lying between Russian positions, Sukhodol. The Russian army is advancing here with small forces, but the results are quite impressive. By winter, a substantial stretch of border territory could be under Russian control. Incidentally, it's from these forests near the border that Ukrainian forces have been launching missiles and drones into Russia. Apparently why Russian command decided to establish a buffer zone here and push as deep into Ukrainian territory as possible. Now to the Sumy bridgehead, where there's also been notable Russian progress. To start with something important, the Russian army crossed the border at a new point and partially took the border settlement of Turia, along with surrounding territory. In effect, Russian forces are linking this area into a single unified bridgehead, and the entire border section of Ukraine in this district will come under Russian control. Slightly north of the settlement of Mokritsa, a couple of square kilometers were taken, while on the western flank from Novaya Sich, Russian forces advanced eastward and also entered the settlement of Kianitsa. It's clear the Russian army will now work to close this pocket, territory that is ending up semi-encircled. Now to Kharkiv region, where there was also Russian progress. Troops from the Seva, north, grouping advanced another 4.5 kilometers and took the village of Verovka. The village itself is quite small, but what matters here isn't the village so much as the positions gained. The highway from Bely Kolodez to Prikolotnoye, the only remaining route out of Bely Kolodez, has now been effectively cut off. It hasn't been physically severed yet, hasn't been physically crossed, but it's clear it can no longer be used for withdrawal. That leaves the AFU garrison here with only one route out, across open fields toward Petropavlovka. But as you can probably guess, moving across open fields in the age of drones means heavy losses. So the Ukrainian garrison in Bely Kolodez, we're talking about a few dozen troops, really has only two options left: surrender or stay there permanently. The lesson here is, don't let a situation reach the point where withdrawal is no longer possible. But over all 4.5 years of this war, Ukrainian forces still haven't learned from their mistakes. They keep dragging things out until the last moment and only wake up once they're already encircled. And I think we'll see the same thing further north. Ukrainian command will drag things out until the last moment, then discover that 20 villages have ended up in a pocket. Not just villages, but Ukrainian soldiers along with them. It's quite possible they're counting on being able to slip out, since in a settlement like Verovka, I doubt there were more than a couple dozen soldiers. Small settlements like this typically only need 10-20 people to hold. First, there simply aren't many houses, and realistically you can't put soldiers in every single one, since they could then be picked off one by one. So far from every house is actually occupied. Also from the Borovaya sector, news came in today that the Russian army has taken control of the settlement of Olgovka. Barely a day goes by without some small village being taken. It's clear the Russian army has become active again on the front lately, and is starting to take control of substantial stretches of territory. By the way, news is also coming in today from the Ukrainian side that a Russian internet service similar to Starlink is beginning to operate over Ukrainian territory. The Russian company 1440 has started providing stable connectivity over Ukrainian territory for several hours a day already, meaning the Russian army will soon resume using strike drones on satellite links, as it did this past spring when Starlink terminals were used, and the Pavlograd-Pokrovsk highway was essentially paralyzed within a couple of days. With Ukrainian trucks massively coming under drone strikes, this closely resembles the Ukrainian side's Hornet response, or Ukrainian drone strikes on Crimea, which caused major problems for the Russian side, since Ukrainian drones in Crimea fly as if they're at home thanks to Starlink. So we may well see the same situation play out over Ukraine soon, which would be a very serious problem for them. Possibly even bigger than Iskander strikes. With drones like this, it would be possible to paralyze shipping on the Dnieper around the clock, striking day and night. Ukraine is heavily dependent on bridges across the Dnieper, and if the Russian side gains a large number of terminals like Starlink's, failing to exploit that advantage would clearly be a major mistake. It's quite possible the Ukrainian side already understands this well, since there were rumors that Ukraine has only a few months' head start left in drone technology, and it's advisable to lock in territorial gains now, or the war could take a turn for the worse. It's precisely thanks to Starlink that Ukraine still holds a major advantage across the entire front to this day. Regardless, stable connectivity and the small dishes attached to hexacopter drones that drop 82mm mortar rounds have caused significant damage to the Russian army. If the Russian side gains this kind of advantage in the war, things will change dramatically. Strikes 150 or 200 km into Ukraine's rear will become routine. Some observers online noted that it's no coincidence Zelensky recently pleaded with Musk to open up his satellite network over Russia. In any case, we'll keep following this very important aspect of the war. It's quite possible we'll soon see the first drone strikes carried out on the Russian army's new satellite link. Very good news came in over the past day from the Slaviansk and Kramatorsk directions. I reported on them yesterday, but additional data has come in today. There was excellent progress here, both in terms of numbers and in terms of the significance of the positions taken. Let's start with the numbers. More than 6 kilometers of advance. As for significance, it's honestly hard to overstate. First, Russian forces finally secured the heights west of the village of Kaleniki. This came at great cost. Fighting for these heights lasted almost 4 months. And now that chapter is finally closed. Also significant, Dolgi Les, Long Forest, has been cleared. This is a fairly large forest north of Rye Alexandrovka, where AFU had well-equipped positions, including tanks in prepared positions. As long as the forest remained uncleared, there was a standing threat of counterattacks on Rye Alexandrovka. Now that threat is gone, at least from the north. On top of that, Russian troops can now mass in this forest and use it to pressure Nikolaevka. By the way, not all of the Russian gains are marked on the map yet. Sources on the ground indicate, reliably, that Russian forces have already entered Nikolaevka. But for now, positions there appear too delicate to display on the map. So we'll wait until Russian forces have firmly established themselves in Nikolaevka and full assault operations begin, at which point the advance can be shown on the map. Yesterday I explained what it would mean for Ukrainian forces if the Russian army takes the important settlement of Nikolaevka. There was also good progress on the Kramatorsk direction. Here, including the pocket, the advance amounted to almost 7 kilometers. The pocket was cleared, and the heights west of Tikhonovka were taken. Following these heights, Russian forces advanced to Vasyutinskoye, entering the settlement and taking half, actually more than half, the greater part of the village, although on the map the entire village is currently marked as Russian-controlled, which doesn't match reality. Fighting continues in the northern part. Besides the fighting there, Russian forces are also pressing on Ukrainian positions toward Persha-Travneva. What's notable here is that from these positions, it's about 5 kilometers to Kramatorsk, to the Kramatorsk airfield to be precise. And the airfield is part of the city, so it's fair to say Russian forces are now about 5 kilometers from Kramatorsk, which is very close indeed. Of course, there are nuances, a fair number of fortifications, and the airfield itself is well fortified. But nonetheless, bit by bit, over the course of 2 months, a sizable bridgehead has been built up across the Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and it's clear Ukrainian forces will no longer be able to push the Russian army back off this bridgehead, though I have no doubt they'll try. Summing up the past day, 2 settlements and 47 square kilometers of territory came under Russian control. A strong finish to July, and the whole month, in fact, was a strong one. A quick note on Iran and the Strait of Hormuz before we close out, since this remains an important thread to keep an eye on. According to CBS News, citing multiple sources, the United States and Israel are planning what would be one of the harshest bombing campaigns to date against energy infrastructure targets in Iran, with strikes possible throughout the weekend. Sources say the plan was discussed during President Trump's cabinet meeting at Camp David on Friday, with power plants and refineries likely among the targets. An Israeli official told CBS that Israel is unaware of any decision to restart full-scale military operations and hasn't been asked to join any strikes on Iran, while the US president had not yet given a final go order as of Friday. Cedar News Plus 2. On the economic side, the fallout from the prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz keeps deepening. According to reporting on a Bank of England analysis, the bank warned in a worst-case scenario that continued disruption to the strait could push UK inflation above 6% and force it to reverse all the rate cuts made over the past 2 years. The bank held its key rate at 3.75% this week, its 5th hold this year, even as oil prices spiked on renewed US-Iran strikes, with Brent crude jumping from under $71 to over $100 a barrel before easing to around $91 to $92. Chief economist Hugh Pill separately flagged a risk of a slow, insidious build-up of longer-term inflation as businesses and workers try to recoup losses from the energy shock, though public trust in the bank's 2% target hasn't been seriously shaken so far. For scale, parliamentary research puts the pre-disruption flow through the strait at around 20 million barrels of oil a day, with Gulf oil production cut by at least 10 million barrels, roughly 10% of global output, and LNG exports from Qatar and the UAE also severely disrupted. Euronews Resolution Foundation. Should the US-Israeli energy infrastructure campaign go ahead this weekend, it would mark a real escalation on top of an already fragile energy picture for Europe. One will keep following closely. That's all for today's Frontline Update. Wishing you all a good weekend. And as I said, tomorrow we'll sum up July. So until tomorrow.